So it's now my pleasure to present you why medical cannabis works. First, my greetings from Rüten to Frankfurt. I hope you enjoy the day in Frankfurt. And now some science on the medical use of cannabis. The cannabinoids of marijuana exert their effects mainly through the endocannabinoid system, among others. And I want just to present you something on the endocannabinoid system, how it works, which components it has, so that you understand why marijuana works. First are here the components of the endogenous cannabinoid system, which is called endo, from inner, endocannabinoid system. Everybody of us is producing cannabinoids in his body. These are called endocannabinoids. And they bind to certain receptors, which are called cannabinoid receptors or vanillate receptors and several other receptors. But we mainly talk about endocannabinoids and cannabinoid receptors. And the other components of the system are the enzymes that induce the generation of endocannabinoids and those who degrade the endocannabinoids. And what is the role of this system and how can it best serve our body? Now some conditions with endocannabinoid involvement. First are diseases of energy metabolism. You know that the endocannabinoid system is regulating appetite, which has to do with cachexia, obesity. Then the second main issue is pain and inflammation and central nervous system disorders. The endocannabinoid system is involved in multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, Alzheimer's disease, epilepsy, schizophrenia, anxiety. Then there are other systems, the cardiovascular and the reproductive, respiratory disorders, including hypertension, asthma, and so on. Then we have eye disorders, glaucoma, for example, cancer, very important issue, gastrointestinal and liver disorders, such as inflammatory bowel disease, musculoskeletal disorders, such as arthritis. So these are all conditions with endocannabinoid involvement. I want to bring you one example how the endocannabinoid system is inhibiting the overactivation of the nervous system. What happens, for example, after brain injury? Harmful mediators are released, for example, the neurotransmitter glutamate. This causes secondary damage to the brain, for example, inflammation. And in response, endocannabinoids are produced which counteract these release of harmful mediators and their harmful effects. So this is an example of how endocannabinoids bring down a certain damaging situation. Now the components of the endocannabinoid system looked at somewhat nearer. We have first the cannabinoid receptors. You know, the cannabinoid 1 receptor, which is in the brain, if it's activated, is causing a high or pain reduction or appetite increase. We have the cannabinoid 2 receptor, which is involved in inflammation, allergies. Then we have vanillate receptors. Some endocannabinoids are binding to vanillate receptors. We have other receptors, PPAR gamma, for example. The endocannabinoids, the most known are anandamide and arbutinolbutyrol, but there are more than 200 fatty acid derivatives which are similar to endocannabinoids of like anandamide and 2-AG. And then we have the cannabis of the cannabis plant. Currently, we talk about 120 cannabinoids. They are not present in one plant, but have been found around the world. The main of them, or the best known, are THC and CBD, and there are also other cannabinoids. We will talk later on it a little bit. So, how does the endocannabinoid work in detail if we have a closer look at it? First, we have to look at how nerve cells talk to each other. You see two nerve cells. Above is the so-called presynaptic nerve cell, which releases a neurotransmitter, for example, glutamate. In the middle, we have the synapse, which is the gap between the two nerve cells. And below, we have the so-called postsynaptic nerve cell, which receives a neurotransmitter, a signal. The words of the language of this system are the neurotransmitters. So nerve cells talk to each other by neurotransmitters. And now we come to the role of the endocannabinoids in this interplay, how endocannabinoids raise their voice. We have again the synaptic nerve cell, and in red, the postsynaptic nerve cell. In this example, there is a stimulus, an action potential, which releases the neurotransmitter GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and it binds to the GABA receptor, and this causes an action. If this action is too strong, then the postsynaptic nerve cell produces endocannabinoids, and they activate CB1 receptors on the presynaptic membrane. We call this retrograde inhibition of neurotransmitter release. So this is the typical situation how endocannabinoids work. And of course, we can also put exocannabinoids from the cannabis plant into the system, and they will also activate the CB1 receptor or CB2 receptor. Where do endocannabinoids act? As you see, CB1 receptors are found on nerve cells in the brain. And first, the CB1 receptor was called the brain receptor, the brain cannabinoid receptor. But in later years, we found out that the CB1 receptor is present in nearly every organ and tissue: spleen, heart, lungs, skin, bone, reproductive tract, and so on. And the CB1 receptors are found on immune cells, among them white blood cells, leukocytes, the spleen, tonsils, and even in the brain, in immune cells of the brain. Another example, it is not only in the brain, but also in the bowel. Our bowel is often called the second brain and containing 100 to 200 millions of nerve cells. And I take this example from irritable bowel syndrome. 5 to 15% of the population is suffering from irritable bowel syndrome. And it is characterized by an overactivity of these nerve cells in the bowel. The language of these nerve cells is the same as in the brain. And endocannabinoids counteract this overactivity. And if this endogenous attempt to rebalance the situation, plant cannabis may help. Thus, the major role of the endocannabinoid system is to counteract the overactivity of all neurotransmitters, dopamine, gamma-aminobutyric acid, glutamate, serotonin, glycine, noradrenaline. It can best serve our body if all elements of the system are well balanced. We call this homeostasis, and the result is health and well-being. Here are a list of medical conditions of my patients. These are 2 pages. If you look at it, you see pain diseases, you see neurological diseases, you see psychiatric diseases, you see diseases concerning appetite, nausea, vomiting. You see skin diseases such as acne adversa. On the next slide, you see including tics, tinnitus, inflammatory diseases. There is no such molecule as THC, not a second molecule such as THC with such a broad spectrum of pharmacological effects. Now we come to the actors in this system. Well, one is well known. It is THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, also called dronabinol. We see the classical structure with the tail of 5 carbon molecules and the structure with 3, well, the next well-known is cannabidiol. It looks very similar as THC, but one of the ring is open. The same length of the tail. Well, THC and CBD have a very broad spectrum of action. From THC, we know appetite enhancing, reducing pain, relaxing the muscles, and so on. From CBD, we know anti-epilepsia, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, antipsychotic. And now we come to some smaller cannabinoids. This one is tetrahydrocannabivarine. It is the same structure as that of THC, but with a smaller tail. It has anti-obesity effects because it is reducing appetite. Then we have the parallel to cannabidiol, which is cannabidivarine. Again, a structure similar to cannabidiol, but it is with a smaller tail. It is an anticonvulsant, antiepileptic. We have here cannabichromane, which has, for example, anti-inflammatory potential. We see cannabigerol, which has antidepressant effects. We see tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. Again, it is similar to THC, the phenolic THC, but it has a COOH moiety. It's the acid moiety. It has anti-inflammatory effects. Here, the counterpart on cannabidiol, cannabidiolic acid, CBDA, again with this COOH moiety. It has antiemetic effects. I would like to come to other compounds of the cannabis plants, which are the terpenoids. They play a smaller role, but we know that they also play a relevant role when it comes to modulation of the main effects of cannabinoids. They are produced by the cannabis plants as insect repellents or insecticidal, and to hinder animals to eat them. And they have antibiotic properties, for example, which can be used by humans. Let's have a look at some of them. Some of terpenes, for example, limonene, We know that these have antidepressant effects. Their smell is antidepressant. Here is myrcene. It's an analgesic and sedative. We have alpapinane. It has anti-inflammatory potential. All these terpenes are also found in other plants. Yeah, we see them in cannabis, but also in many other plants. We have anti-anxiety effects by linalool, beta-caryophyllene works against inflammation. It is interesting that beta-caryophyllene also binds to the CB2 receptor. So beta-caryophyllene is a terpene, but it's also a cannabinoid, if you want. Neurodiol, which has sedating effects. So if you look for reliable scientific information, I'm the executive director of the International Association for Cannabinoid Medicines. If you look for scientific information, if you look something, any word you are looking for example, irritable bowel syndrome or cancer or tinnitus or something, you can just click on the newsletter and you find a database of nearly 20 years now, what has happened the last 20 years of research. You will find all if you search a certain keyword on this website. Yes, who is the ICM? You may know some of them. Our current president is Dr. Professor Guzman from the University of Madrid. Our former chairman was Mark Waugh from Canada. You may know Rafi Mitchell or Ethan Russo. Many thanks.